Well, today is a very welcome day for some of you who have been reading along with us in the Word of God. We transition from the Old Testament into the New Testament, more comfortable and familiar territory for many of us. And obviously, when we move into the stories of the New Testament, we are greeted with the four Gospels, the accounts of the life and ministry of Jesus: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, the word gospel comes from the Greek euangelion. It simply means good news. And when you read the Gospels in the Greek, one of the things that I really appreciate is in the Greek, the Gospels are referred to as the kata, Mattheon, Marcus. But this word kata means according to. It is the same word that is used for a testimony in a trial or a court of law. These are pledges of these individuals of the things that they have seen, studied, and heard about the life of Jesus. Now, you may be familiar that the Gospel of John is unique among the four Gospels. We call Matthew, Mark, and Luke the synoptic Gospels, of course, coming from the word synopsis. When you give a synopsis, you're giving a brief summary of significant details. And we see in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, really the ideal is to tell the story of the life of Jesus. John is different. John's story jumps out, the difference jumps out in chapter 1. John starts in the beginning. He goes back to the creation. Very early, we're introduced to theology rather than just a narrative story or biographical information about Jesus, where he was born, who his parents were, how his life went from point A to point B, and things developed. John is much richer in his theology. He calls Jesus the Word of God, and we start to really see some different and richer, deeper theology. We also note that John is less interested in telling us a chronological story and more interested in telling us a theological story. We see that John builds themes, and one of the things to do when you're reading the Gospel of John is to just ask yourself, what theme is John building as he tells his story of what he experienced as he walked with Jesus? We have some fascinating material that is unique to John, and consider these when thinking about the themes and why John tells these stories. Certainly the story of Nicodemus, the Pharisee that comes to Jesus at night, Jesus encountering a Samaritan woman, washing the disciples' feet, his resurrection appearance to Mary alone, the prayer in Gethsemane. And then also in John, what is unique and significant are the 7 I am statements of Jesus. Profound theology. So pay attention to the I am statements when Jesus proclaims, I am, and then what theme is developed from that. Now, saying that the Gospel of John is different from the others by no means undermines its validity or accuracy, because after all, what we have in John is the same basic story, presented a little differently, perhaps a little more stylistically, but it's the same basic story about Jesus, the Messiah of Israel, announced by John the Baptizer, who walks and teaches and gathers disciples and works miracles, runs into conflict, gets arrested, is tried by the Jewish leaders, is crucified, and then ultimately is resurrected. So the same basic story, lots of overlapping events: the feeding of 5,000, walking on water, the friendships and relationships he had with Mary and Martha and his disciples, and then many of the same significant overlapping sayings about rebuilding the temples and prophets without honor, receiving those who are sent by Jesus, and his predictions of betrayal. So recognizing the difference in John by no means is to imply or indicate that there's some question of the validity or the authenticity of the gospel. It's just a fascinating and different presentation, focusing less on the chronological events and more on the theological significance. So as you're reading the Gospel of John, be thinking, what is John trying to teach us in how he presents his gospel and the themes rather than the sequence of what Jesus is doing and saying. Pay attention to that and have a blessed experience reading the Word of God.